So many times people will get a horse not really thinking through their life situations or anything like that, and it just ends in heartache. So what this video is supposed to do is to save you from the heartache and the pain of having to sell a horse that you have purchased. My first point is you shouldn't buy a horse if you're just recently into horses. So what I mean by this is if you've just started learning how to ride or if you've just gained an interest in horses. There's a few different reasons for this. My first reason is that as you learn to ride, your skills will develop and get better, and you will naturally advance through horse training. I've seen a lot of people deal with heartache in this area because they're a beginner, so they go and they purchase a horse that was great for them as a beginner, but as they advance and their skills continue to grow, that horse isn't necessarily able to grow with them. So a lot of beginner horses are amazing and they're really safe and easy to ride, but they're not always going to be able to carry you to where you want to go. So you have to step up in order to advance with riding. If you have big goals for the future, even if you're just starting out, I would recommend not purchasing a horse right away. Let yourself learn how to ride different horses through a lesson program or through leasing and competing, and then find a horse that can suit your skill level. Another reason not to purchase a horse if you're recently into horses is because you have yet to develop the skills to recognize a good deal when it comes to buying a horse. So many times I've seen people who are just into horses and they're really excited to get a horse, but they don't really know exactly what to look for when looking for a horse, and so they end up getting a horse that just doesn't really suit them or fit them. Believe it or not, but this can be dangerous for the rider. If you don't know what to look for and you don't know what to do when purchasing a horse, you could get a horse that is totally unsafe for you. If you're recently just into horses and you're a child, or maybe you're the parent of a child, hold off on buying a horse. And the reason for this is kids grow up quickly. They're gonna get taller, they're gonna get bigger. So if you go ahead and buy them a pony that they can ride now, chances are they are probably gonna outgrow it in a few years, and then you're gonna have to buy another horse and sell that horse. To save your child the heartache of having to go through selling their beloved pony, I would just hold off and wait until your child is full grown and you can get them a horse that suits them. My next point for when you shouldn't buy a horse is if you have upcoming life changes. So I'm not saying don't do it. I did it. When I moved out to go to school all the way across the country from my family, I ended up buying myself a horse because I needed something to do. But let's say you're 17 and you're going to college next year. It may not be a good time to buy a horse. And the reason for that is college is a big life change. You're going to probably be moving away from home. Your schedule is going to get a lot busier with school and sometimes work, and then having to juggle a horse on top of that. And so if you have life changes, maybe you know that you're moving in a few years, or maybe you know that you're having kids in a few years, or something like that. Those are just all things to consider because horses cost a lot of money and they take up a lot of time. And so those life changes could suddenly take priority over a horse. So you just need to consider that potential horse and what that would look like in the situation before you go and buy it. Another thing about life changes is they tend to cost a lot of money. As I mentioned, I moved out across the country from my family and I paid for my school and I paid for my living and everything like that. And that was a big expense, and that was something new to me as an 18-year-old. I had never done that before. So one thing you need to take into account is, can you afford those random expenses that come with horses? So I'm not even just talking about the monthly recurring expenses. I'm talking about a sudden vet bill because your horse had to see the vet suddenly and now you have to owe $300. And so can you do that? What I ended up doing when I got Tucker is I took on more hours at work so that I knew I would be comfortable if something came up like that I would be able to afford it. Another reason you shouldn't buy a horse is if you're going through a horse phase. So many things on TV and streaming and things like that get us into horse phases. So there's Yellowstone, there's Heartland, all this stuff to do with horses, and it's totally a vibe. And so many people buy into it and they want to experience horses, which is great. The only downside to that is TV shows tend to glorify the horse world instead of helping you realize that there's so much time, money, and expenses that goes into all of that. What I would recommend if you feel like you're in a horse phase, when you've finally gotten out of that phase and suddenly it's not such a idea, dream in your head, that's when you consider it. Because when it comes to owning a horse, you need to get up and go take care of that horse and pay for that horse even when you don't feel like it. So that is the time you actually need to consider buying a horse. Here are some things to ask yourself if you're going through a horse phase and you need to decide whether or not you want to go ahead and get that horse. Number one, when you get home from work, are you just too tired to do anything and you just want to stay home for the evening? If so, a horse may not be a good idea for you, because with a horse, once you come home from work, you're going to have to go to the barn and take care of the horse. Number two, do you like having extra money for vacations? Well, if you want a horse, you need to be able to sacrifice that money for vacations and put it towards taking care of your horse. The point I'm trying to make is you're going to have to sacrifice for your horse if you own one, and that's a big thing to consider. What are some alternative options to buying a horse? The first one I'm going to recommend is leasing. So leasing is basically when someone owns a horse and they basically rent it out to someone so that they can get the experience of taking care of a horse. Leasing is a great option because you're usually tied into a contract of like a year or 6 months, but you don't have the long-term responsibility of owning that horse and figuring out what happens to it in the end. If you have a kid that is still in their growing phase, leasing is a great option because that kid can learn how to take care of that horse and they can ride a lot more than just doing lessons. But once they outgrow that horse or pony, they can move on to something else. There's a few different leasing options you can look for. So number one is a full lease, and basically you're going to pay the horse owner a regular monthly fee in order for you to ride that horse as much as you want throughout the month and to take care of it. Number two is a partial lease. So with a partial lease, usually you're sharing the horse with someone else. So there may be two of you partially leasing that horse. So you would get the horse for a few days a week, and then the other person would get the horse for a few days a week. That's a cheaper option than a full lease, and you're still getting more ride time. The last option for leasing is called a free lease, and believe it or not, this is a really common option that you may want to look into, especially if you're on a budget. But with a free lease, basically the horse owner just kind of gives you the horse in a sense. I mean, they still own it, but you can take it to your property. You are responsible for it. You are responsible for its care. You are also responsible for its bills in terms of farrier, vet, monthly bills, and everything like that. But at the end of the day, you don't have to worry about the long-term commitment. You could always give the horse back if you wanted to. And so this is a more reasonable option in terms of you're not paying a regular monthly fee to the horse owner to use the horse, but you are gonna usually pay the maintenance fees for the horse. If you're younger, like maybe a teenager or in your 20s, one thing you can look into is becoming a working student for a horse trainer. So what working students do is working students will go and work for a horse trainer. In return for working, the trainer will teach them about horse training and about the industry, and you'll get to work with a bunch of different horses and get really good feedback on your riding and skills. And so if you can't afford to purchase a horse, or if you're in a season of life where it's just not an option, look into being a working student. A working student is a big commitment. There is a big time commitment, and you have to be committed to being at events and shows and doing chores every day. But you get the experience and you get hands-on time with the horses. Some other options, if you are in your horse phase and you want a horse, I would highly recommend starting with riding lessons. That's just going to give you a basic foundation for what you need to take care of a horse and also to ride a horse. You can also volunteer. There's a bunch of different organizations and ministries that work with horses and that they would definitely need other volunteers. And then lastly, I'm always seeing job postings about needing help at stables, and you can work a part-time job at a stable and you can get paid to work with the horses and take care of them. So those are all options. If you want to be around horses and you want to develop your skill, but you're really not in a situation where you could purchase a horse right now, those are all things to look at. So if you've watched this video, but you've decided that you still want a horse, number one, congratulations, I guess. But number two, I have an online course called the Horse Care Keys to Success course. I will walk you step by step through every aspect of horse care and what you need to know to own a horse. And so be sure to check that out. The link is in the description, and it's at shop.equinehelper.com.